Taking a peek at the steering wheel as well as the cluster screen inside of the Volvo EX40. You're going to see a very similar setup in a lot of other Volvo vehicles as well. So first thing I'll point out is that the steering wheel inside the vehicle is heated as an option. But if yours is heated, inside of the infotainment system on the right side there, you can see a little driver's seat icon with the steering wheel. And there are 3 unique levels that you can hit for the heated steering wheel. You can also toggle on your heated seat that way instead. Adjusting the steering wheel is always going to be a manual process. So just in the center column of the steering wheel, you can push down in order to release, and it's telescoping. So you can go in, out, up, and down to find that perfect position. Once you do, you're going to click it in order to lock it back into place. Another thing I'm going to point out is that along the driver's door, there's the option for seat memory. So if your Volvo has the memory option, all you're going to do, you get your driver's seat set up the way that you'd like to. You're going to push M and then either 1 or 2 for it to remember your own personal profile. So very useful if there are multiple people driving the car. And then so many different options here. So we'll start off with the stick on the left-hand side. So you can use the stick here in order to flash your high beams out. You can't permanently lock them out though, and that's because I'm in the auto mode. So there are a series of different light modes like light off, things like that. If you're in the auto mode, you go up 1 level, that's going to put you into an auto high beam mode instead. So what that means is that if the car recognizes high beams are needed, it's going to turn them on automatically. If somebody's oncoming, it's going to turn them off before bringing them right back on again. If you want to permanently lock your high beams out though, go 1 level lower. So your headlamp mode, you could then push away to turn your high beams on, pull towards you in order to turn them off. It's just that when you're in the auto mode, you won't be able to permanently lock them out, but you can flash them out if you'd like to. You'd also have the option of turning on your front and your rear fog lamps as necessary. And then there's a button on the tip of the stick, and that's to be able to reset your trip counter as well. So I'll touch on that one in a second. Stick on the right-hand side is going to be for your wipers. You can adjust out to your different wiper speeds. There's a button on the tip of that stick as well in order to turn on your rear wiper. You're going to pull towards you for the front wiper fluid. You're going to push away in order to get the rear wiper fluid going instead. If you ever need to change your windshield wipers, inside of the infotainment system, there are a series of options. You're going to go to controls. You've got your wiper service position. So you're just going to toggle that on. That locks the wipers in an up position for you to be able to change the wiper blades out yourself if you wanted to. So straightforward there. And then so many different controls. So the ones on the left-hand side here are for the adaptive cruise control system or your ProPilot Assist. So as you start to drive, you can toggle the system on this way, and it's going to set it at whatever your current speed is. From there, you can push up in order to increase 5 kilometers or 5 miles per hour at a time. So it's up or down 5, but it essentially brings you to the nearest 5 or the nearest 0 by going up or down. So as an example, if you're at 37 kilometers an hour, you push up, it'll bring you to 40, 45, 50. If you push down, it'll bring you to 35, 30, 25, etc. You can push and hold up or push and hold down to increase 1 kilometer or 1 mile per hour at a time instead. You can also flip between different modes. So as you adjust there, you can see a steering wheel pop up or a car. So a steering wheel is ProPilot Assist, where it's going to keep you perfectly balanced in your lane as long as it recognizes the lane markings. Versus the car, it's just going to be a regular adaptive cruise control system instead. And then there's a distance indicator. So how close or far are you away from the vehicle that's in front of you? There are 4 different levels, but I want you to think of that almost like a 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi type of a rule. So level 1, I think, is ideal for conditions where, let's say if you're going on just residential streets or if you're in stop and go traffic, versus level 2, maybe level 3 on highways and interstates if you're traveling at higher speeds. But that level is going to be dependent on your own personal preference. From there, you've got a series of different buttons along the right-hand side. You could do a button push there in order to activate your assistant built into the screen. So if you wanted to do things like change songs, radio stations, navigate using your voice, things like that, you'd be able to do it. If you were hooked up to an Android or an iPhone device, you could do a longer push and hold instead, and that's going to activate either your Siri or your Google Assistant instead. From there, there's this little Pages button, and that's going to bring you to either a full map and cluster or just little turn-by-turn directions instead. So actually what I want to do, let's get an active route going here so you can see what this looks like. Actually, that one's right next to us here. That's not going to work. Let's do Tim Hortons. It's a little bit further away. Nice little coffee shop. No, little coffee shop. It's a huge chain. But you can see there, you've got full map and cluster now instead. And then by pushing this button, that just brings you to turn-by-turn direction. So it's going to tell you turn left, turn right, go straight, whatever the case may be. Or you can do full map and cluster. I'm personally a big fan of that map and cluster, but that's going to come down to a matter of personal preference. Now, one thing is that it's strictly going to be for factory navigation. So if you were hooked up through Apple CarPlay, you wouldn't be able to view Google Maps or Waze, whatever the case may be, inside of that cluster. If you downloaded additional apps, like if you downloaded Waze to the screen or other applications for maps, strictly going to be Google Maps, so it's going to show up there. So that's one thing you have to take into account. If you do have any other map application going, that would just show up blank instead. And then said you've got the option of going full screen versus, but I love that full screen look. Looks so good. And then you've got a series of different switches here. This one is your trip counter. So remember that little TM button there? So this, we could reset our trip counter if we wanted to. So you've got that option. You can see a few different options here. So actually, why don't we zoom in a little bit here, make it a little bit easier to see. And I'll explain actually a few other things here as we go. So you've got your trip manual counter, your trip auto counter, and then you've got the distance that you've traveled for each. And then you could also reset your counter. So all you're doing is swiping across, and you can reset your manual counter there instead. So you can't reset the auto counter. That's up to the computer what it does there, but you can easily reset it if you'd like to. So if we reset, that just brings us back to 0 instead. But you can see based off of our last trip auto counter that we've traveled 105 kilometers total. Then you can just close from there. So that's all this button does. Well, if you ever get any messages inside of the screen, you could just push there and it acts as an OK button. You could then push up and down here in order to be able to adjust your volume. So you can see there we're adjusting volume this way, and then you can go left or right this way in order to change stations. So if we go to our radio for a second there, you can see as we see there at adjusting, jumping between different stations. You could do a push and hold instead if you wanted to act more as like a seek button. But I mean, your best bet, honestly, to change stations, 102.1 FM.
Got it. Here you go.
Is just to do that instead. Like change it using your voice. It's so much easier to do in comparison to like just going button pushing this way, reaching over to the screen, whatever the case may be. Then inside of the cluster screen, there's a lot of info that you need to know here. So you've got your speedometer here off to the left-hand side. You've got your, I don't want to say the power gauge, but think of that almost like a traditional tachometer, and then a charge gauge here as well. I'll explain those ones in a second. Our trip counter has been zeroed out. From there, you can see your current range done a few different ways. So I've got 140 kilometers left, 35% of the battery instead. You can see what gear you're currently in. So whether that's park, reverse, neutral, drive, whatever the case may be. Straightforward. Then you've got your headlights on if you were in the auto lamp mode. If your lane keeping system was turned on, there's the outside temperature, who is currently in the vehicle. So you can see there, the driver currently doesn't have their seatbelt on, but hold on, watch this. If I put my seatbelt on there, you see that those gauges just go away. And I'm parked, so the parking brake is automatically applied there. Now, inside of the infotainment system, you'd also have the option of adjusting your units. You're going to go System, Units, and then you've got either metric or imperial. So you could switch between, and when you do, it's going to update everything. So it's going to update miles, kilometers, etc. You can also do a little split screen here for your speed. So if you wanted to have both kilometers and miles per hour showing, you'd have that flexibility. Now, something about the cluster screen as well here. So you've got a few different gauges. So you can see your current speed along the outside. You've got your little digital speed there. And then this one, as you go to put your foot down to drive, you'll notice that the power gauge goes up. So that's how much power you're actively using. If you're just going slow, you're coasting, you'll notice that that gauge is pretty low. But if you gun it, it'll jump up high. And then when you take your foot off the accelerator, if you've got it set for one pedal drive, either on or auto, you take your foot off the accelerator, you're going to slow down, and you'll notice it's trying to recapture that charge. So you'll notice that this charge meter dropped down. And then you put your foot down again on the accelerator, it's going to pop back up again. So think of it almost like a traditional tachometer instead, but it's for your power gauge based off of how much juice you're currently giving the ride. And then it's there, that's going to be for your recharge braking level, so your regen braking. So as you go to brake, you take your foot off the accelerator, one pedal drive, you'll notice that gauge drop down instead. So I know that is a lot of information, but that's how you use the steering wheel, the cluster screen, and some basics inside of the Volvo EX40.